So welcome, Belinda. Before we start, I'll just introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. So my name is Cathy Bettman. I'm currently Associate Professor and Deputy Dean at the Metavision Institute. So let me hand over to you, but I'm delighted to re-meet you today because we go back a little while, but
We
there's
go
been
back a
a
way.
huge big gap in which you've done amazing things. So, can you introduce yourself?
I will, and I'm sure our link will come out in the conversation. So I'm Belinda Densley, and I'm a group singing facilitator is the first way I'd introduce myself. And I run Acapella Singing, which is a community of singing groups in Geelong and the Bellarine that have been running now for 21 years, where people gather to sing for fun and well-being. I'm so interested in that work that I'm also a PhD student researching that subject. I'm at the Violet Vines Marshman Centre for Rural Health at the La Trobe Rural Health School. So, yes, I'm currently active in both of those roles.
And before we go on to research, which is obviously the big point of this conversation, tell us about those singing groups. So, you meet on site. How many people in the group? How good are they at actually singing? Do you have to be really good? And like, how long does a class or a meeting go for?
Sure, everybody can sing, and all group singing facilitators will tell you that. So, everybody can sing. In order to participate in my groups and people that run groups like mine, which are singing for fun and well-being, so they're not for performance, they're not for audition, they're not about being elite or excellent, they're about that core human need of participation. People that run my groups meet in community halls and spaces like after school care buildings, community facilities. My groups run for an hour and 10 minutes. I have 5 a week, and there's somewhere between 30 and 50 people in each group. And the people that attend these groups do it as part of their weekly routine. They do it as part of their lifestyle. So sometimes people go once a month to other types of models. My model is a weekly model, but there's, over 1 million people in Australia that are singing in a group a week.
Wow. And it's good for breathing. So I would imagine it has some kind of meditative sort of effect, some sort of even mindfulness, some effects like that. Um, but I would also imagine hugely valuable for one's mental health and well-being. The whole, not only the breathing and that stuff, but the connection, the community of it as well.
You've nailed it there. Absolutely. So there's been a huge body of research that has established benefits of group singing, the well-being benefits, and they're social. So very much about socially connecting for people that are isolated and depressed, anxious and lonely, but also for those people that aren't, that need to be in, we're meant to be connected. We are meant to be connected as human beings. So we meet that social connection need. There are mental well-being benefits. There are psychological benefit, the expression of feelings, be they joy or grief through song, equally important, the full range of expression. And it also has, psychological, social, mental, spiritual. So I think you were touching on mindfulness, joy. There's a lot of joy, feeling of bliss, a high, transcendence. They're all words that are associated with the participation in
So
group singing.
how do you choose what people sing? Do you choose or do they bring it or how does that work?
Well, that's interesting because the research I'm doing, which I'm sure we're going to get to shortly, but this isn't a topic that has been researched very much. How do you choose? But it is what I've researched. So I've come up with a grounded theory of singing facilitation, which describes the steps in the process. It describes the social process of facilitating people to sing. And one of the big process categories is curation of song. So how do you select song? And it's something that facilitators put an enormous amount into. It's almost, if we're thinking in counselling terms, it's the intervention. So what's the pulse of the community right now? What are people thinking about? What's happening if you think of Bronfenbrenner's systems, what's happening out there? What's happening in here? What's happening in our community? What's happening in our world? What's the right song to help people move on that topic? whether it's to grieve, whether it's to be angry. You look around at the world this weekend, people are angry, people are disenfranchised, people are scared. And so the songs that I will put to my groups this week aren't going to let people avoid those feelings. They're going to let people hook onto the song and go, yeah, I'm asking questions. I'm I'm uncertain about the future of the world. I'm questioning power. So the songs will never preach and they'll never take a political perspective as you wouldn't in counselling. They're sort of non-partisan, but they allow lots of space for people to express themselves with and onto the song.
And do they only express themselves by singing, or is there also a time for conversation or talking about the effect that it had on them or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah. That's another part of the fourth part of my grounded theory is about transforming communities. So, yes, there's a lot of so people do talk after the session or a little bit through the session. But for me as a facilitator, for example, my work isn't to then do the sense making. I provide the session and people will walk out to the car park. They might talk for 2 hours about
Oh,
what's happening in politics or what's happening in their, visiting their mum in aged care every week or,
yeah,
what's happening in their son's bedroom. There's multiple topics that will be aroused through the
yeah.
singing. But
Yeah.
my job isn't to process that in words, but it's certainly to facilitate um, a connection with the song and with people, with themselves and with each other.
Oh, wow. It's quite complex. I just want to ask
Mm.
one more question and then we can move on. But I mean, I could keep on talking about this. So they never perform though as a group. It's purely a coming together, a forming of a community and all these effects of the singing. It's not something that you perform.
So there's no rules and there's no governing kind of body. So there's plenty of singing groups that where all the participants will experience the benefits, but they are performance based. People perform occasionally. So for my groups, I'm very clear that when you come to my groups, you're not rehearsing for performance. It's about being here now as you are on that day. You don't have to worry about a later outcome. But from time to time, we will accent a community event. So um, gendered violence is a topic that comes to mind. So sometimes there might be a vigil in the local community for a tragic loss of life. And I might go to that vigil with some singers from my group and bring a powerful song in celebration or to advocate for social justice. Um, there might be a fundraiser for bereaved people that have lost their pets. We might go and sing there. We might go and sing in nature, not for an audience, but to perform with the elements. But then other times in July, 75 singers from my groups and I are going over to Hobart to a singers festival, and there will be performances, but in the spirit of sharing. Hey, this is us singing for you. They'll sing back for us. So it's certainly not an Stedford or, pay $25 to come and watch us sing. And so, yeah, it's a different notion of performance. I could talk about performance,
Well, I
for
could talk
hours.
about all this
Yeah,
without stop. There's so many interesting questions. And I mean, I was always aware of your passion for it. I think we first met when you were doing your master's. Is that
that's
correct?
right.
And
That's
that
right.
was in the research
That's
class.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I did my Masters of Counselling and Psychotherapy, there was a 4-unit research stream. So we had the opportunity to develop like a reasonable size study and then get ethics approval, conduct the study, write it up, and hopefully um, publish from it. So it was a really good research stream with 4 units. And you were the supervisor that guided me through that project. And that's how we met. Yeah, it was fantastic. And I remember my mind being blown by, you know, thematic analysis and the steps and
So can I ask a question? Because it's so pertinent to today and counseling and psychotherapy education and the need in Australia, particularly to develop research for the benefit of the counseling discipline. Doing it like that in your master's degree, was that helpful? Did that encourage you to go further, or do you think you would have got there anyway?
Well, no, I wouldn't have got there anyway because I had already undertaken research in the community. So when I came into the masters, I'd already done two major research projects in the
Wow.
community without ethics approval. So I didn't know what I didn't know, but I did some groundbreaking work in singing with people with dementia and undertook literature reviews from what I remembered from doing my honours thesis, 10 years before that. I had various experts come in and observe me conducting the groups, analysing it from a physio's, an OT's point of view, a psychologist's point of view. I wrote it all up, and it was a really good bit of research, but it didn't get ethics approval. It was just me managing it like a lone ranger, and I did two of those projects, and they were just never going to get anywhere because they didn't have the rigor. And I didn't know what I didn't know. So coming into the master's program and going through that, really, and I only came into the master's to understand more about the role I did and how group singing operated. So then to learn about the rigor of the ethics procedures and then to undertake a methodical study with a methodology, um, it's really, really important. So I absolutely think it was fantastic to do the research training. I think it's a shame when master's courses have only one unit of research now. I don't think you
Yeah.
can get that depth.
Yeah. And that's the problem because that is a wonderful way, but it's very labor intensive because you have to get students through ethics. So you have to have a really decent research proposal, and then you've got to support, and usually there would be, about 15 in the class. You've got to support
Mm,
them to be able to do the study and then write it up and present it. So it takes a lot of time, and
it does.
unfortunately, that has its problems when you're teaching at a university or an institute. But
Mm.
great that you had that opportunity. And then how did you decide, I'm not done with this, I want to do more?
Well, it was exactly that. I didn't feel done with it. I thoroughly enjoyed all of the steps of producing, of completing that study in the masters and writing it up and having it published. And I had more research questions. I think that research project study ended with 8 further recommendations for research, and I wanted to do them. So I enrolled into a PhD program and have been exploring those questions for the last 3 years, um, and nearly at the close of that.
Fantastic. But um, it's been hard too, because I think you also had the experience, like a lot of counseling, students do, finding a home for their research projects, being able to find somewhere that has supervisors who are trained in counseling and psychotherapy and can guide you through it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can. I engaged with a few different universities on my journey to get to now, and finishing really happily at Violet Vines Marshman Centre at La Trobe. Um, and I think you've just spoken about having experts in counselling and psychotherapy. I would say that the discipline shifted a little bit in my PhD. Um, because originally I did sit in the counselling discipline when I was exploring group singing. And I have landed there with theoretically coding therapeutic group work to my grounded theory. Um, but it was more important to have um, methodological experts on my team rather than counseling experts, because I think what sits underneath, and that's not, yeah, what sits underneath counseling research is an understanding of philosophy and probably sociology and the social determinants of health. And I think it's really important that counselors understand, counseling students understand those philosophies and sociological principles. So I think that they can be found in other disciplines.
Okay, and that's really interesting because my experience and lately has been because there's so few counseling PhDs that generally speaking, when you supervise higher research degrees, you find that you're sharing the supervision with psychologists, with sociologists, with people in education. And that can be a really fantastic experience. But there's also an aspect of it where the presentation of the dissertation can vary slightly for these different disciplines. And then you have a little bit of, when I say tension, I don't mean in a bad way. I just
Mm-mm.
mean there is the need to get the final draft in a way that serves a particular discipline, maybe. And there's just a
Yeah.
tension around that.
I mean, that's a massive question in and itself, isn't it? So we always want to please. I'm trying to think of the phrase that's like, it's not pleasing the piper, but there's always someone you can please or hold the party line, so to speak. So this is the way this discipline might want it to look, or this discipline might want it to look. But I think the more I read the more I understand, while I felt very lucky getting into a PhD program, I feel so lucky and I, I'm so grateful, and I am grateful, very grateful to be in a program. But I didn't realize what an attractive asset I might have been as a mature woman who is well educated and um, respectful, that I was an asset. And actually, the PhD is a research training program to learn about research training, to learn about research, but it's also the becoming of yourself. And really consistently across the supervisors I've had, who are all incredible in their own different ways, it's this is your project and this is your unique contribution, your significant original contribution to knowledge. So whilst there are sort of requirements of how you present your thesis, the more original and creative it can be with rigor, the better. Um, so I haven't really encountered any difficulty pleasing anyone in how I present it. Uh, and there's just so many different ways you could present a
There
theory,
are.
aren't there?
Then comes the next issue of finding examiners. And I don't know, lately I've kind of been in this conversation around, well, who do you get to examine it? When you get a counselor slash psychotherapist, they tend to be more general. But it seems
Mm,
to me if you get somebody who's more into disabilities or more into education, that then there are kind of different expectations. So it's quite interesting. But I'm very conscious of the fact that we've been talking and could talk much more. But before we do that, can you tell the audience what exactly it is you're doing, what your topic is? You've mentioned grounded theory, but can you expand on that a little bit?
sure, sure. So we spoke earlier about the well-being effects of group singing. They've been well established, but what's been overlooked is the role of the facilitator. So who actually runs these groups? So a group of people doesn't arrive in a hall and spontaneously burst into singing. Somebody does the work. Somebody arranges that to happen. So the facilitator role hasn't been researched um, to any great extent, and the facilitator voice hasn't been heard in the research. So people might have interviewed participants about the facilitator, but not the facilitator themselves. So my significant, unique contribution to knowledge is listening to the voices of facilitators. So I undertook a grounded theory, used a grounded theory design to interview 30 expert singing facilitators, those who'd been sustaining groups for a couple of decades and had established um, evidence. So they had an established record of sort of publishing or speaking or advocating for the profession. And then I conducted a participatory workshop as well with another 23 expert singing facilitators. And so using a constructivist grounded theory model, so I co-generated data through because my I guess, epistemology and ontology, and my philosophy of how knowledge is created is that my philosophy is that it's constructed through social interaction. So we made meaning together, and I formulated a grounded theory, which is that there are four sort of process categories that explain the social process of facilitation. So really, in a nutshell, I'm illuminating the hidden work of the group singing facilitator, which is really important health work, actually. It's really important community health work.
Mm, mm. Did you say that one of the eligibility criteria was that they had significant experience doing it?
Yes.
What was the bar like?
So I was looking for people that had either been facilitating groups for more than 10 or 15 years, that
Mhm.
they'd published before. So they might have written articles, or they might have, a couple of them had Order of Australia medals um, for their community service through singing. Some of them, one of them was in the UK and had a Prime Minister's Award last year for their enterprising and new work with group singing with new babies because of the high suicidality and the postnatal depression of new mums. This particular facilitator had developed a program to support mums and babies through singing. So she has gone on to get this Prime Minister's Award. So she was one of my participants.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and so my findings, because grounded theory, it's got four process categories, and it's not very exciting to hear those words, but I developed a five episode podcast series that explains the work. And in every one of those podcasts, there's 300 voices. So it's filled with singing. So that accounts for 250 of the voices. And then all of the facilitators use their voices along with mine to explain what we do. It's really beautiful.
Wow. And you nearly finished. Well, you kind of finished. The draft is final draft is done, and that's
Yeah.
been submitted.
Yeah. So we're still going back and forward with I know you would know better than me with all of your experience of PhD students, but I think it's in, but I'm assured that it'll go back and forward several
Yeah.
times before we get to examination, and
Yeah.
hopefully with a subject matter expert um, and a methodology expert, perhaps as examiners, like you were talking about the
Yeah.
difficulty in selecting examiners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start on the downside a little bit. What were the struggles, if any, for you? Like for anybody contemplating doing a PhD, obviously you've got to be, in the right place, right time sort of thing. What for you is important to consider that, you found a little bit challenging?
I think the challenge is always what you could do compared with what you should do. So the period of time that you're a PhD student, is so exciting because you're actually being asked to read and think deeply and wonder all those wonderful, beautiful things, ask questions. Um, but you've got one contribution to make, one specific contribution. So one of my supervisors always said, you're putting one grain of sand on the beach, not the whole beach. So I think for me, the challenge was, and a really good way of managing that challenge was always finishing any episode of work or any day, coming back to the one goal of what I was doing. So if I read off on tangents and went, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I never change my research question. Stick with the question, stick with the aim, and then everything else can be a side quest later.
Wow. Okay. Are you a very efficient, organized person?
Yes.
Was it hard to keep to that, or is that comfortable with your persona?
I, with as much humility as possible in saying this, I came to know myself through this last 3 years, and I came to accept that I'm gifted as a project manager, that I am efficient. I'm very, very well organized. And sometimes that surprises people around me, and I've just had to own it and go, oh, this is working. This project is big enough for I love to count things. Um, It's given me something to count. I love backwards mapping. So it's due on this day. If I get this done by this date, and if I beat it by a week, that'll be my little game. So actually, it was really fun when I got sick of reading, I got sick of writing, just to manage a project. It does take a lot of organization. It's probably, we all contribute in different ways. So somebody might write a play, somebody might write an opera, somebody might write a book. And for me, PhD was really a nice project to develop a suite of skills.
The thing is this, I'm still talking about the challenges. Um, when you have a family who are not doing a PhD and maybe even
Mm,
haven't considered what it takes to do a PhD, maybe I'm thinking of my own experience
mm,
where, especially around the end, where there's this
mm,
basically bum on seat rewriting, amending,
mm, mm,
perfecting. They don't understand what's taking so long or why you're so
mm,
involved or you can't go
mm.
out or do something like that. So it is quite time consuming. Did you find that challenging?
Yeah, I can see that it is challenging for people, and I've been very well supported by my partner. So we made the decision together a number of years ago, are we doing this PhD? And I'm the student, but she's the um very much the cognizant, very aware partner of a PhD student. So this is and she's an emergency services worker as well. So we both stand beside each other in our very difficult roles.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that I've written that she hasn't read, like with a pen and put in commas and so on. But we've committed to this period of time, and we're both looking at the end together. And she might do more of these jobs around the house for a while, and then I'll swap and I'll take over so she can pursue um, her next set of interests. And my son as well is really, he understands that this is a big time limited project. And I take him to university with me. He comes to the library, and I sometimes ask him, he's only 10, but what will you do your PhD on? And I think it's the old thing, you can't be what you can't see. So I want to model that mama's going to do big things, and
Wow.
mama's working really hard. Like I often say to me, my teachers just gave me back my assignment and I've got lots of mistakes in it. It's not, I'm still learning. And I hope that helps him to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've already said that, wow, in the last 3 years, you've really grown yourself. So there's been a lot of personal development. But what have been the other positives? Like if you spoke to somebody considering a PhD, what would you say? How would you
I'm,
encourage them?
I'm so sorry. Speaking of that beautiful little boy,
Oh,
I'm just
there
in
he
an
is.
interview. Oh, he's home. He's definitely home. Monkey, good. I'm
Yeah.
just going to record. Beautiful. Something GoPro. Beautiful. Can you please not interrupt me just for 10 more minutes? Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
No,
That's
not
something
at
from
all.
Nathan.
We've got families, we've got lives.
Someone considering doing a PhD. Um, what was the rest of that question? Sorry.
So what would you say, like if somebody was thinking about it, how would you encourage them? What would you tell them were the great bits about it that you found enjoyable or, you know,
Oh, it's such a gift. I would encourage anyone to learn, like whether they're 5 or 50. I think to the privilege of acquiring knowledge, like we don't have to work in the salt mines. The privilege to acquire knowledge, to read, to discuss, it's immeasurably, it's a wonderful privilege. So I'd encourage anyone to learn always. It's the only way of having more um, power in your own life, I suppose. It's because you become more humble. You learn how much you don't know. But I would definitely encourage people, because you learn what you don't know. Learn that there are so many that every idea that seems simple is contested for a reason. Um, you see it with stuff happening in politics this week. There's reasons, there's historical reasons, there's systemic reasons over time that cause things to happen. It's not so simple as whatever you saw in the news. Um, and And there's so many people around that will help you as well. Like just to have a day sitting with a librarian, what a privilege to show you, you know, to show you things that you didn't know existed. Um,
I always remember my supervisor. She said to me, ultimately, your topic is really important, and obviously, it has to contribute to the discipline. But she said that's not all the learning. You've mentioned the personal learning as
mm,
well, but there's also something about learning about research, about doing a major project, beginning
mm,
it and finishing it. And I think her major thing was that you then have a duty to pass that on. So it's not just about passing on your knowledge of the subject, but it's also the knowledge of the process.
absolutely. You know, all of the supervisors that I've worked with, and particularly the supervisors I'm with now, are just such wise, well-rounded women. So they attend to me academically, and then they attend to me personally when needed. They're mentors, they're career guidance. Sometimes it's put it down and go and see your family. Sometimes it's go back and read that again, you know. But there's a distance from getting emotional about things. You know, if an article gets rejected, it's not the end of the world. It's a learning process. Like everything's converted to learning. And you can see when you're working closely to really experienced female academics, as I'm lucky to be, how generous they are, really, because they're not, yeah, they do a lot of work for the growth of the people that will come next or that will join them in the field. Um, yeah, it's incredible mentoring that goes on. And you would renovate your house better after you did a PhD because it really is such a big project
Actually, I've never thought
managing.
about it like that.
Yeah,
I
you've
like
got to
that.
plan every step of your project. And I look at everything in my life as a mini PhD now. Like, well, what's the end? What's the start? What's the middle? What are the steps? Let's research it properly. Let's do a lit review on this on this Reno. Yeah.
So I'm just very mindful and being reminded that you've got a life of your own happening there. So I'm very mindful of the time. Is there anything that I should have asked that I haven't asked that you want to throw into the mix?
Well, I just feel like I probably just talked about myself and will watch back and feel terrible. But
No,
in
that was the
terms of
whole idea.
in terms of students, I mean, I've had the fortune of also teaching lots of subjects, including counselling students with research. And I think it's really easy to go, I'm not interested in research, so I'm not really going to invest in this topic. um, the people that don't want to become researchers, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because research is necessary in every part of your life. Even if to be able to access the knowledge in an article quicker, to get your way around a journal article more efficiently. I
Yeah.
think, I mean, the only way you're going to be part of an industry that meets the needs of humanity is to contribute to it. And I think particularly with counselling, if we're talking about counselling, it needs to be updated so fast. With the length of time it takes to publish things, even what we learned from COVID is probably only being published now. We were all counselling through COVID without any books around us or any journal articles saying this is how you do it when the world goes into a pandemic. So you've got
Actually,
to share knowledge.
you've just brought up something though that I was walking my dog today and thinking about that. Are we being too prescriptive about how things have to be written and therefore not
Yes.
getting things and useful material out, both from not only, but from students and from other researchers? It seems to me there's so much valuable research done that gets turfed out because it's not properly written or can't find a journal for it or something. It just seems such a shame
I
somehow.
suppose, yeah, that would probably be the last point. You're absolutely right. Um, is I think what puts people off research is academia, and the rules and the rigor is important. But I've been really well supported in my PhD to use novel methods. So I've used established grounded theory methods, but integrated it with singing and songwriting. So I did my memo writing in song. I use song in my interviews. My participants sang. We did a participatory workshop. I've released my findings not as a journal article but as a scholarly podcast with lots of singing in it. So we don't have to do things the way they've always been done if we don't want things to always be the way they were. So as a researcher, I think you can also innovate the way we communicate.
Oh, wow. How do I thank you for all the time you've given and for your lovely story? Really, really, really do appreciate it. So,
It's my pleasure. I remember when we first met, I used to say to my partner all the time, every time I write to Cathy, she writes straight back to me with an idea. And I remember and that's something about supervision. You just feel so supported and companioned in your quest for knowledge. And I remember that was the thing that struck me about you. You were always interested to keep on track with me. So it's a
thank
pleasure
you.
to come back around.
That's embarrassing almost, but lovely to hear. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.